Hi, guys. I wanted to start with our next chapter. So, this is for the book The Collectors, and it is chapter 9. A serious mistake. Van had never climbed stairs so quickly. Of course, he wasn't really climbing in them now. Several hands were locked around his arms, and several other hands grasped his collar, and all the hands hauled him up the steps, across the next landing, and into the calendar, which with its big black books. Van caught a last flash of Pebble and Barnevalt before the crowd closed in around him. He tried to think of something to say, something that would fix everything, but words scrambled out of his reach like the pigeons scuttling out of their way. The crowd dragged him to the center of a big stone chamber. Everyone was speaking at once. Van heard something like ordinary boy, and someone shouting, couldn't find his way, and the big man with the raven on his shoulder snarling something about including or intruding, danger or dagger. The crowd grew even thicker, and the noise of the arguing voices grew louder, and felt himself sinking down into a tarry, sticky blackness where there was nothing to hold on to anymore. He closed his eyes, and the voices faded. Van started to hum to himself. It was a little tune without words that he had made up years ago. He thought of it as Supervan's theme. Now he hummed it just loudly enough that it filled the inside of his own head. Dun 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 dun. The plugged out voices shouted at one another. Van felt something with paws and whiskers sniffing at his cheek, and something smooth and furry rubbing at his shins, and then a sudden bump on his shoulder as two grown-ups started shoving at each other. Enough, boomed a voice. Someone grabbed him by the shirt once more. Van opened his eyes. The big man's face loomed in front of him. The raven on his shoulder twitched its wings. No more discussion, the man shouted over the crowd. I'm taking him down to the hold. Loosen your grip, Jack, said a deep, clear voice. The crowd hushed. Van, dangling from the big man's fist, couldn't see where the voice was coming from, but in the silence, he could hear every one of its words. He must weigh all of 50 pounds, the deep, calm voice went on. 57, squeaked Van. 57 pounds, the deep voice repeated. Do you really think he's going to break free? Free, the raven squalled. See, he sees us, the man called Jack. He got down here without any of us noticing him. What is he? I don't know, said the deep, clear voice. Why don't we let him tell us? Now loosen your grip, Jack. Very, very slowly, Van felt himself being lowered back to the floor. Jack's fists released his shirt, too. Van staggered backward, disoriented by the swirl of voices and bodies, and took his first good look around. Dozens of people surrounded him. They wore long, dark coats with many pockets, or with hooks and buttons and attached pouches hanging on crosswise leather straps. Some were men and some were women. They had they had hair and skin of all shades, and eyes that glimmered like puddles. A gray pigeon nestled against the neck of one sleek-haired woman. A live raccoon was draped around the collar of a man with a ponytail. A few people wore giant spiders on their lapels like brooches. One very tall, thin man with tousled gray hair and rigid cheekbones carried two big black rats on either shoulder. There was so much to see that, just for a second, Van forgot to be terrified. So, boys, said the very tall man with the rats and the rigid cheekbones, and Van realized that this was where the deep, clear voice had come from. When he spoke, everyone else was silent. Tell us who you are. I'm Van, Van gulped. Van Markson. He stuck out one trembly hand. Nice to meet you. The man stared at Van's hand for a moment. When he finally reached out to grasp it, Van's hand disappeared completely in his. I am Nail, said the tall man. Without letting go, Nail took a slow, appraising look at Van, cocking his head cocking his head to either side. Suddenly, he stiffened. His hard cheekbones and long, narrow nose flashed closer, bringing both gigantic rats along. "What is this?" he asked straight into Van's ear. One of the rats pulled out his front teeth and balanced itself on Van's shoulder. Its whiskery nose sniffed at Van's earlobe. "Oh, that?" Van raised his free hand, brushing the whiskers away. "That's my hearing aid." Nail's eyes narrowed. "Are you recording this or transmitting it to someone?" There was a murmur. The encircling crowd tightened. "Who are you working for?" I'm 11, said Van shakily. "I don't work for anybody." "Then why do you wear this hidden microphone?" "It's not just a microphone," said Van. "It helps me hear. It's an amplifier." But the crowd was around him wasn't listening. Their mutters and whispers surged over Van, swamping him with dark wash of noise. Van's heart pounded. He started to hum again, just loudly enough that his own voice pushed back against the wave of angry sound. Dun 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 dun. The rat continued to sniff at his earlobe. Her whiskers, as fine as frayed velvet, whispered against his skin. At last Van turned to face her. He felt strangely sure that it was her, and found her beady eyes staring straight back into his. Van was so used to not being noticed, even by other people, even by people who matched him in age and grade and number of legs, that being looked at so deeply was disconcerting. "Hello," he thought. The rat stared at him for another moment. Then she turned and scampered back to her perch on Nail's shoulder. She pressed her nose to Nail's ear. "Thank you," Van thought he heard Nail's lips murmur. His eyes flicked back to Van. "Other than the device in your ear," said Nail, in a voice that made everyone else go quiet again, you are ordinary?" Van didn't like the sound of this, the other than part or the ordinary part. He didn't like it any better than when Pebble had called him just a little boy. But the circle of dark coated strangers still loomed around him, and the flight of stairs leading out of here was very long and very far away. "Yes," said Van, "I'm just a person." "A person?" Nail repeated. "But who are you with? Who do you belong to?" "Well, I live with my mother," Van began. "She's a singer. She's kind of famous, if you like opera anyway. But right before I came here, I was at a birthday party, so I was with a bunch of people, if that's what you're asking." The big man named Jack pushed closer to Nail. Found his way inside on his own," Van heard him snarl. "Yes," Nail put up his hand, waiting for the crowd to still. "How did you manage to get inside, Van Markson?" I just," stammered Van. "I followed the girl, Pebble, the one with the squirrel." "The girl?" Nail echoed. "This girl?" And he nodded toward Pebble, who stood nearby, anxiously clenching and unclenching both hands. The squirrel on her head rose onto its hind legs and chittered defensively. "I didn't do anything wrong," Pebble shouted. "I didn't bring him here. I was just making a collection. I don't know how he saw me." Nail turned back to Van. "How did you see her?" "Well, the first time she was right there taking coins out of the fountain in the park, and the second time at the birthday party." But the crowd had broken out into furious murmurs once again. "Twice?" Nail's voice barely carried through the rumble. "We talked," said Van. "She splashed me. I gave her a marble." But nobody was listening to him. Words overlapped, hisses and vowels smashing into one another, tangling into knots that squeezed around his body. "Spoke with him?" boomed a voice from somewhere over Van's shoulder. "Little boy," shouted another voice. "Standing? Seen?" Jack's raven screeched. A lanky black cat peeled out of the shadows, winding itself around Van's ankles. Its bright eyes glittered up at him, slit-pupiled, predatory. Once more, Nail's deep, clear voice sliced through the din. "And just what has he seen?" Nail waited for the quiet before continuing. He turned to Van, opening his hands. "Why don't you tell us, Van Markson, exactly what you have seen?" Van swallowed. Well, he began, and he glanced at Pebble, hoping for some subtle signal that would tell him just how much to say, but she and the squirrel just stared back at him, petrified. Van pulled his eyes away. I noticed that the floors are pretty clean, even though there's a lot of pigeons down here. Nail's lip twitched. And I noticed the room full of maps and charts, the one named at the one named the Atlas. Van glanced nervously from Nail to Jack, who once again taken the spot just over his shoulder. And I noticed that all the books in this room match, so I suppose they're more for writing things down than for reading things. I think maybe they had something to do with birthdays. And I noticed there are a bunch of things sealed in bottles down in the huge room, like little glowing coins and something that looks like candle smoke. I noticed Pebble really doesn't want to be here, and I noticed that I think there's something really, really big down there in the dark, and that Pebble won't talk about it. But that's Van stopped, his mouth going dry. That's all. The crowd around him had fallen silent. No one moved, not even the spiders or the birds. An echoing absence hung in the air. That's all, said Nail. That's all, said Nail at last, very softly. He's dangerous, I told you. Jack's voice was like a blade on the back of Van's neck. He needs to be contained. We can't keep him, the slick-haired woman with the pigeon on her shoulder. Van turned to face her. People will search. Is that what we need, Jack? A city full of people trying to find us? What do you suggest, Sesame? Jack growled. His dark eyes snapped to Van. If you don't want to keep him, shall we get rid of him entirely? Van's heart shot to the back of his mouth. His body tensed to run. No, said Nail. Jack's raven had given a little caw deep in its throat. No one else spoke. Nail bent close to Van's face. His eyes were gray and cool and steady. By coming here, he said, by speaking to us, just by seeing us, you have put yourself in serious danger. You must never let anyone know about us. Do you understand? Van nodded because there was nothing else to do. Do not come back here. Do not mention anything about us or about this place to anyone. We will be watching you, and if you do tell anyone, we will know. Van swallowed. Nail leaned even closer. And if we find out that you have spoken of us, you and anyone you've told will have to be removed. Understood? Van nodded again. Nail put out one long-fingered hand. Van stuck out his smaller one, and they shook. We have your word. Nail straightened up to his full height. Now, he said, Pebble will escort you out. The chamber exploded into action. Birds soared off in all directions. Rodents skittered for the staircases. Dark-coated people strode back to the shelves and tables or disappeared through the chamber's entrance. Even Jack, after one more look at Van, stalked off into the darkness. Really? Pebble whispered to Nail, just loud enough that Van could hear. Take him back where he belongs. Nail didn't whisper. If he's not a total fool, he'll realize how lucky he's been. And he nodded at Van. Goodbye, Van Markson. Pebble hesitated for an instant. Then she turned and hurried toward the staircase. Van ran after her. When he glanced back one time, he saw that Nail and his rats were still watching him, all of them standing utterly still in the lamplight. Fear usually made Van even quieter than usual. But now the quiet just made him feel alone. And the only person who made him feel less alone was this weird girl with the mossy penny eyes. So, he began as he followed her up the flight of stairs. Your name is Pebble? Pebble didn't answer. That's a funny name. Pebble's head whipped around. Van is a funny name, she said, especially for someone your size. They should have named you Minivan. Ha! Cried Barnevelt. Minivan, I get it, Minivan. Van sighed. The squirrel went on chuckling all the way up the flight. Why did you name him Barnevelt? Van asked when the squirrel finally stopped laughing. Pebble glanced back. Her eyes were sharp. Who told you his name was Barnevelt? Van pretended he hadn't heard this. He looked over his shoulder toward the archway of the Atlas, where a few dark-coated grown-ups hurried about their work. Are there any other kids down here? Pebble didn't turn around this time, but Van saw her spine stiffen. Not right now, she said. For a moment, Van kept quiet, watching the bottom of the Pebble's coat whisk ahead of him across the floor of the huge entry chamber. He waited until they were halfway up the flight of stairs that led to City Collection Agency before asking, in the most casual voice he could manage, what was that huge sound? Pebble hesitated. What sound? That huge earthquake sound. Nothing, just something in the hold. What's the hold for? Asked Van. Holding things, said Pebble. What things? Lots of things. Lots of things? Echoed Barnevalt. I know lots of things. My name, your name, how to open a walnut, when a twig is too thin. Lots of numbers, like 3, that's a number. 2100, that's another number. And the big room full of bottles, Van plunged on. What's the glowing stuff inside all of them? What does it have to do with coins and smoke and little bones? Is it chemicals or atoms? Or Pebble turned around so suddenly that Van almost crashed into her. The squirrel on her shoulder gave a start. Well, hello there, Barnevalt squeaked, as though he was seeing Van for the first time in days. How have you been? You ask too many questions, said Pebble in a voice kind of like the edge of a steak knife. You can't know because you can't know. But Van had just put the pieces together. His thoughts weren't going to be sliced apart now, not even by a steak knife. The chamber full of bottles, piles of coin, smoke from birthday candles, tiny broken bones, wishbones. Are you collecting people's, wishes? He breathed. Pebble grabbed Van so hard that he let out a squeak. Without a word, she shoved him through the hidden doorway, across the dingy office of the City Collection Agency, and straight out the front door. Van stumbled onto the sidewalk. The daylight was blinding. In the street, cars vroomed and honked. The sudden noise of the city pounded against the pulse in his head. By the brightness of the sky, he could tell that it was still afternoon, but that was all. He could have run away from Peter's party an hour ago, maybe 2 hours, maybe more. Pebble, hurrying through the door behind him, said something Van couldn't hear. Then she broke into a run. Van jogged after her. His legs ached from climbing hundreds of stairs. His chest hurt. The world was much too loud and cluttered. But even worse than all that was the thought of what his mother would do when she learned that he had run away. He could picture her terrified face, smell her perfume as she reached out to grab him. And there his imagination, switched off. He couldn't begin to guess what his mother would do next, because Van had never done anything even half this bad in his entire life. He staggered down the next sidewalk and the one after that, and the one after that, chasing the ends of Pebble's flying ponytail. Are you? He thought he heard Pebble yell. Are you what? Maybe she'd just say, hurry up. Van was running as fast as he could, but after all those staircases and all those long city blocks, his legs were turning to rubber. Abruptly, Pebble stopped. Van saw her stare at something just across the street. Her body went rigid. She reeled backward. Go, she yelled, shoving Van in front of her. You're almost there. Van stumbled over the curb and into the street. In his last glimpse of her, Pebble was whirling around, her face tight with panic, tearing back in the direction from which they came. A sound from the roar from the hold hammered in his ears. The air turned foggy, as if a dense cloud had burst just above him, and then as Van took another staggering step, the world tilted. There were a few long frozen moments when Van realized that he was flying, not like Supervan would fly, more like a plant would fly if you knocked it out of a window. Then his right side seemed to catch fire. His head thumped cement and he felt one hearing aid slip out of his ear and tumble away. The roar thickened. His head clanged. Above him, the sky spun with rooftops and the leafy tips of trees. Between Van and the spinning sky stood a giant yellow insect. The insect seemed to be saying something. A second later, a pair of hands hoisted Van gently off the pavement and onto his behind. Van sat up, blinking. The insect turned into a man in yellow spandex, a bike helmet, and sunglasses. Somebody put the lost hearing aid in Van's hand. Van worked it back into position. Look both ways, the insect bike man was yelling. Rang my bell, shouted. He may not have heard you, said a smooth voice from just over Van's shoulder. He's deaf. Hard of hearing, Van corrected. The pounding in his head made him close his eyes. An arm braced Van's shoulder. Are right hurt? Van touched his sore hip. He had landed on his side, the side with the glass bottle in his pocket. He wriggled his stinging hand through the cloth. The bottle was there, safe and sound. But his pants had dirty, rubbed splotch on the hip. Where he pulled his hand back out of his pocket, he saw that his palm was scraped raw. Hit your head, said the close voice. That landed second, said Van. I just bumped it, I think. More words and noises dribbled out of him, but Van wasn't really paying attention anymore. Confusion coursed from his pounding head through the rest of his aching body, and by the time his eyes focused again, the insect bike man was whirling away. Van turned to the right. Seated beside him on the curb was an older man in a white suit. He had neatly wavy gray hair and blue eyes surrounded by crinkly smile lines. The smile that went with them was encouraging and warm, like a doctor might give you after a booster shot. I'm sure you don't remember me, said the man. I'm Ivor Fallborg. You are Giovanni Markson, said the man, or Van for short. Van blinked. How do you know? Oh, I am quite an opera aficionado, the man explained. I met you and your glorious mother at the Opera Guild party a few months ago. He rose to his feet, pulling Van with him. Are you sure you're all right? I'd be happy to hail a taxi. No, said Van. I can walk, I think. Then I hope you'll let me walk you home at the very least. I live in your neighborhood. Oh, I'm not going home, said Van with a fresh, sinking feeling in his stomach. I have to go back to the Gray's house. Charles and Peter Gray? Mr. Fallborg's smile crinkled again. They are dear friends of mine. Now you must let me escort you. We're only a few minutes away. Mr. Fallborg was right. As soon as they turned the next corner, Van recognized the row of snooty stone houses and wide front steps. And there at the front of one of the steps was a police car. A few of the boys from the birthday party were gathered on the sidewalk, throwing acorns at one another. Peter sat on the curb with his arms folded over his chest. Peter's nanny was sobbing something to the police officer, who was jotting on a tiny notepad. Standing on the sidewalk, one hand clenching the silk scarf around her throat, her eyes flickering up and down the street, was Van's mother. Van's stomach suddenly felt like a bowl of cold oatmeal. He slunk up to the sidewalk toward the crowd, squeezing as much of himself into Mr. Fallborg's shadow as he could. The nanny spotted them first. Van saw her mouth open wide as she shouted something, her finger pointing in his direction. Ingrid Markson whirled around. Giovanni! In spite of her high heels, she was next to him in 2 seconds. She wrapped him up in both arms. Van sagged against her for a moment, feeling safe and grateful and very glad it was her hands clutching him instead of Jack's, although he wished it wasn't right in front of a knot of staring boys. What were you thinking? His mother demanded, pulling back so that Van could see her face, although she was speaking loudly enough for Van and the entire street to hear. Why would you jump out of a window and run away in a city like this? What on earth were you thinking? She grabbed his scraped hand. And what happened to you? Are you all right? Van's mouth opened. Nothing came out. A minor collision with a bicyclist. said Mr. Fallborg. I saw it happen. I was too late to do anything else, I'm afraid. You were hit by a bicycle? His mother squeezed Van's face between her lily-scented palms. Are you hurt? Did you hit your head? The police officer and the crying nanny were heading towards them. The other boys, except for Peter, had edged closer. They were still throwing acorns at one another, but they were clearly eavesdropping at the same time. Van couldn't quite shove his thoughts into sh- Van still couldn't quite shove his thoughts into order, and his mouth was too tightly squished between his mother's hand for any words to get out anyway. He began. I believe he landed on his side, Mr. Fallborg put in helpfully. I hope you won't mind me intruding, Signora Markson. I'm Ivor Fallborg. I'm a member of the Opera Guild. We first met at the gala last March. Oh, yes, Mr. Fallborg, said Van's mother. How lucky that you were there. Her eyes flashed back at Van. You still haven't explained what you thought you were doing. Van swallowed. His mind hopped from the open window to the Barnevald squirrel and the white cat he had used as a squirrel stand-in on his miniature stage, and from there to, I saw a stray cat, he blurted. A stray cat? His mother repeated. It was in the yard. I thought it might be lost, so I tried to catch it. Van's mother looked as though he had just tried to force feed her a dog biscuit. She leaned back, lips pursed. You jumped out of a window and ran away from a birthday party because you saw a cat that might have been lost? The police officer and the weeping nanny joined them. The other boys sidled even closer. Yes, said Van, that was why. Ingrid Markson rose gracefully to her full height. Apparently he was chasing a stray cat, she told the crowd. I am so sorry for the trouble, officer. And Mr. Fallborg, it was very nice of you to give us your time. Ms. Markson, said the nanny, looking very wobbly, I just didn't. It wasn't your fault, Van's mother patted the nanny's arm. It wasn't anyone's fault but Van's. And the cats, said Van, but everyone ignored him. Like everyone is where they should be, said the police officer. He nodded at Van's mother and the nanny before turning to the police car. I'll let you finish your party. The party's over, said a loud voice. Everyone looked around. Peter hadn't moved from his seat on the curb. David already had to leave, he said. Everyone else is getting picked up in 10 minutes, and we spent the whole time out here staring into people's yards. I didn't even get to open up my presents. Peter, said the nanny reprovingly. Van is safe, and that's what matters. Peter's eyes met Van's. Peter's eyes were that cool shade of blue that made Van think of the outdoor swimming pools. They narrowed and the water darkened, and Van could practically feel Peter's chilly hatred flooding up and over him. I'm sure Giovanni is very sorry for disrupting the party. Ingrid Markson's voice was loud enough to push Van forward. Her fingers finished the job. Aren't you, Giovanni? Van took a step towards Peter. Yes, I am sorry. Peter turned his face to the side. His voice was only a mutter, and Van couldn't quite follow his lips, but he was pretty sure Peter had said, you should be. Van slid a hand in his pocket and pressed the little china squirrel between his fingertips. Thank you for inviting me to your party, he said, giving Peter the brightest smile. I had a wonderful time. When they reached the apartment, Van's mother washed his scraped hand, tucked it over his scuffed pants, and then sent him straight to his room. Van had been about to go there anyway. After making sure the door was firmly shut, Van took out his hearing aids and pulled his collection out from under his bed. He rummaged through the box until he uncovered the velvet drawstring bag he had found on the floor of the French department store. Van tugged the blue glass bottle out of his pocket, holding it up to the light. He turned the bottle from side to side. Peter Gray, April 8th, 12th birthday. Inside, the silvery wisp glimmered softly. Peter's wish. What had Peter wished for? Van wondered. He squinted into the bottle, searching for a clue in the spinning silver smoke, but there was nothing that Van could see anyway. How many other stolen wishes were sealed up in that underground chamber? Millions? Billions? And why were they dark why were the dark-coated people stealing them in the first place? Slowly, Van slipped the bottle into the drawstring bag. He placed the bag at the very bottom of the box, under the heap of the other treasures. Van turned to the miniature stage. He cleared away the plastic dinosaurs he'd arranged there yesterday and placed Super Van and Pawn Girl in the center. He set the stolen china squirrel between them. He rummaged through the treasure box until he found a rusty model garbage truck. Vroom! Screech! The garbage truck hurtled around the busy city corner. The tiny gray squirrel had no time to flee. Pawn Girl watched in horror as the truck's heavy tires barreled closer. Then from above came a streak of red and black. Super Van swept in front of the garbage truck, diving so close that his cape whooshed across the front bumper like a big dust cloth. He scooped the squirrel into his arms and soared back into the air, while the truck rumbled away into the distance. You saved Barneveld, shouted Pawn Girl as Super Van landed gracefully on the sidewalk. Yay, you saved me. You're a lifesaver. I love lifesavers, cheered the squirrel. And I love Skittles and Starburst. And it was nothing, said Super Van modestly. No, you're a hero, Pawn Girl moved closer. You've proven that we can trust you, so now we're going to tell you all of our secrets. Van looked at Pawn Girl and he looked at the miniature squirrel, but for some reason here in his own ordinary bedroom, he couldn't imagine what might come next. He was still gazing at the silent stage when a raven landed on his windowsill. Its clever pointed face flicked from side to side. It took in the scene from behind the glass. The preoccupied boy, the miniature stage, the tiny china squirrel. Its beady eyes winked, and then it spread its wings and soared down to the shoulder of the man in a long black coat who was waiting on the twilit sidewalk. The raven croaked softly into the man's ears. Then the man turned and strode away, with the raven still perched on his shoulder, and no one on the sidewalk or in the street or in the high, busy buildings to either side noticed that they had been there at all. All right, so that's the end of chapter 9. That was kind of a long one, so I'm going to end it here, and then we'll get to chapter 10 next time. So we'll see you guys soon. Bye.